partial representation of those, but I think that our bodies have needs for micronutrients in appropriate doses every day, and that dietary supplements are useful as insurance against gaps in the diet. And micronutrient deficiency is very common in the poor segments of our population, and I think it would be very useful to make multivitamin, multimineral supplements available to kids in those areas. And I also think there is great evidence for specific therapeutic and preventive properties of particular dietary supplements, including vitamin D, vitamin E, omega-3 fatty acids, for example. Also, do you remember, David, was it a couple of years ago, Pepsi-Cola announced that it was its great move toward health was to add vitamins to soda?
How'd that work for them?
Yeah, I'm always stunned when I go to the grocery store and I see, the picture of broccoli on the bottle.
Yeah,
like we talked about this.
Yeah.
As if you're really going to get broccoli in the bottle. And the way that, it's not about maligning the vitamin industry, I think, or the supplement industry, but trying to get the good stuff, I think, as Andy's saying, out of food and put it in pill form is an extremely, I think, hard thing to do. And so, I think that, and I think it's probably fine, and I think, you've talked about the precautionary principles as it applies here. Maybe you err on the side of, but there are some instances where it could potentially be problematic, if not to your pocketbook, certainly to your, possibly to your health as well. And I think that's where it gets a little bit dangerous. I still don't know the appropriate concentration of vitamin D, for example.
2,000 IU
I know.
a day.
But you'll have to concede that it's been a confusing topic for a lot of people. People don't know what the right amount is. Vitamin E could potentially be problematic in very high doses. You used to megadose vitamin C, but you don't do that anymore.
No, based on studies that convinced me that the body couldn't absorb more than 250 milligrams a day.
Expensive P, as you said.
Yeah.
Right.
It's interesting. Back in the 1990s when we worked on the food label, on that nutrition facts, I really did think, led myself to believe that if you can just get the numbers right on that ingredient label, you can influence health. If you can just, what's the fat, what's the sugar, what's the cholesterol, what's the calories, what's the micronutrients, and I'm not sure. And then I turned around, and over the years, and I think, and I give not only my colleagues on the panel a lot of credit, but if you really look, Michael Pollan probably has done more for nutrition than most people in nutrition over the last 30 years.
That's because he's come to like 5 of our nutrition conferences.
Right. I mean, so, and the reality sort of hit me is that maybe we just can't. This isn't just a chemical factory, that if we ingest as food, the right chemical composition, that we're going to achieve optimal health. It's not true that if we ate like our grandparents, right, that would give us optimal health, because their diets, I think, were high in saturated fat. But I think that increasingly, if we can, if you went for, if you said, all right, what do we know about nutrition? Where are we in, for optimal health? And I've asked my colleagues. I went up to Harvard. I sat there and I pushed Walter Willett. Right? What is it? Is it calories? Is it fat? What is it? And I think we have an obligation. Certainly for the rest of the public, to be able to explain what is, an optimal diet. Certainly calories, are a major contributor, to ill health in of itself. I think we're pretty convinced it's saturated fat.
I don't think so anymore.
Saturated fat?
The latest information on that, the meta-analysis, which I will send you, indicates that the impact of saturated fat on cardiovascular disease is not what we thought.
Well, so the latest, again, we got to get this straight.
Right.
Right? Because if we can't agree on saturated fat, right? I mean, we're in trouble after all these years. I mean, I thought that the relative...
No. I'll send you the study.
Well, you know, I mean, if you look at, I mean, the big questions, so we can agree on calories.
Yeah.
Calories is...
Yeah.
Right. Can we agree on refined sugars or not? You're going to stick up for them too?
No. I think the big area of agreement that's come out in these conferences, and certainly here in Atlanta, is on the impact of high glycemic load carbohydrates, which would include sugars, flat products made from flour. I think this is the key.
Refined products.
Refined products. And
Okay.
that I think we certainly agree on. And the question I would ask you, since you were involved with food labeling, and this was a little argument that came up here, do you think it would be worth trying to list glycemic index and glycemic load on foods, because people don't have a clear concept of this? It's confusing, and I think it's a very important piece of information. How quickly the carbohydrates you eat raise blood sugar, because I think this is a main driver of obesity in the many people who are genetically susceptible.
I mean, there's no question there's something there.
Right.
Right? I mean, whether it is, I mean, how you do it in a standardized way and in a meaningful way. I mean, there are some abnormalities that people don't fully understand when it comes to glycemic load, glycemic index.
For the sake of the fact that this is the general public
Right.
and not just doctors, can we explain glycemic index and glycemic load to them?
Essentially, it's how fast a carbohydrate food digests and raises blood sugar. And that those which are quick digesting, which we call high glycemic index, high glycemic load, for many, many people in our population, trigger insulin resistance and weight gain.
Right, but it's not, to me, the issue with refined carbohydrates are not just simply its effect on blood sugar, although I think that is very real. I mean, the fact is that, I mean, the orosensory characteristics of sugar stimulate you, and it doesn't, you don't even have to ingest it. I mean, your brain will be affected, I mean, just because of the orosensory. I mean, why sugar? I mean, if you look at what sugar is added to, right? I mean, it's added to water. I mean, it's you know, you look at Chinese. I mean, it's ubiquitous, right? And it's not just because of the glycemic index that's the issue. I mean, it's because the sugar is certainly driving consumption. It's driving that you know that pleasure, right? And we've adapted to higher and higher sweetness levels, I mean, in our food.
Well, and isn't that...
But so we got calories, right? And we can agree that refined carbohydrates measured some way is an issue, right? We have to change in our diet.
And I think we can agree about kinds of fats also.
So I said
fats.
saturated fat, and you came back and said, no, saturated fat.
Probably not so bad, but I think the kinds of fats are still very important, and that many people are eating unhealthy fats, and these are what predominate in the artificial food.
Aren't those saturated fats? I mean, just because I'm
No, I think
really don't know.
refined soybean oil is not a saturated fat, and it is the reason for the imbalance in omega-6 fatty acid intake. There are hydrogenated fats, which are very dangerous.
Just in case you're keeping score, we have agreement on 2 items, disagreement on 2 items.
And we can agree
we're
on
not
salt.
Sure what
I mean,
else.
there's...
Well, so let's just talk about salt for a second. And you've covered it, I mean, of late. I mean, the big change in salt, right? And you know, I think this is where the IOM are very important. Certainly I was trained that some of us are more salt sensitive than others, right? And what I'm hearing the IOM say is we can all benefit from reductions in salt.
And by the
Do
way,
we agree on that
yeah,
or
and
not?
that's an easy one. You know, my experience is that it is very easy to change your preference for salt.
But if you look at cardiovascular risk, I mean, blood pressure, stroke, are we all going to benefit if we reduce our salt level, or only some of us?
I don't know.
I don't know either. But
Sanjay, they turn to you.
Yeah, I was going to say, why are you looking at me?
CNN is the world.
No, but I think the reality is that we eat far too much salt. I mean, I think the problem is more like if you look at any kind of frozen food. I mean, my kids, if they're eating something like ravioli or something, they will immediately say this tastes way too salty. Salt is used as a preservative for those foods, in addition to being used to enhance flavor. But we just simply
It
have
covers
more
for
than we
bad
need.
food in many instances.
Right, we have way more than we need.
But really,
so-
David, that's an easy one to change, that it is very easy to adapt to lower levels of salt and find it tastes just fine. And when you do, things that are out there taste too salty. So that, to me, in my experience, that's one of the easiest taste preferences to change. And that's encouraging. So I think if we say limited salt content of foods, I think we'd find that easily accepted.
So I need to go back to the saturated fat for a
Yes.
second, because I don't want the public to run off and think, steak is the way to go right now. So Andy, what do you mean by maybe it's okay?
The main reason for telling people not to eat saturated fat was fear that this was a main driver of atherosclerosis and coronary heart disease. That does not appear to be the case based on a large meta-analysis of studies. That the impact of saturated fat in the diet appears to be not that great. I don't think that's licensed to go out and eat unlimited quantities of butter and cream and steak.
So you're saying it's not as great as they thought, or it's not a
It
problem?
looks minimal. It really looks
the
minimal.
relative risk is about 1.5,
Right.
right? I mean, 150%. And the real question then becomes, what are you going to substitute, right? So, I mean, what are the better fats? If we can't agree on what the worst fats are, can we agree on what the better fats are?
Yeah.
Right. And
Olive oil.
so the
Monounsaturated fats, the omega sources of omega-3 fatty
Right.
acids.
where are we on the polyunsaturated?
I think
today?
they're dangerous, and I think that they're dangerous because they're unstable chemically, they oxidize readily, and the oxidation products are toxic. And these are widely used in our artificial food.
There's still some disagreement in the scientific community on the polys, right? I mean, the trans fats we know,
Right.
I mean, the saturated, but monos are the best. Polys, I mean, certainly there's controversy still on the polys.
So just for the public's sake again, which ones are monos, which ones are polys?
Olive oil, canola oil, avocado oil, nut oils, mostly monounsaturated, safflower, sunflower, soy, corn, polyunsaturated.
You're going to use butter?
Well, I don't like butter a whole lot, and so it's something that I cut out of my diet long ago. And I'll eat it if I'm out. I'll eat little bits of it, but it's not. But what I tell people is, think of having a saturated fat budget and decide where you want to spend it. I spend it on cheese. I like good quality cheese, but I don't eat butter.
But now
I
with
don't
this
eat
new
cream.
study, you can eat whatever you.
Well, I eat as much cheese as I want.
Oh, okay.
There you have it. So I'm going to ask the audience to start queuing up at the microphones to take some questions.
Of the negatives in the product. So it's not a balanced representation. I mean, right now, the only thing that you can trust, I mean, is the nutrition facts panel. And I don't think we got that exactly right. I think we have to do also a much better job, not only on claims, but on the ingredient panel.
How do you feel about the FDA's allowing health claims on products, some of which I think are, not accurate?
Well, what the FDA has always cared about is whether there's scientific evidence. Right? And if you look at those things that have been approved by the FDA, I mean, those things do have, I think, a lot of science behind them. The problem is the industry has pushed those, I think, to the limit.
We're going to start over here.
Hi, Amy Freeth. I'm an endocrinologist from Cooperstown, New York. And I know you don't want a comment, but I just feel like I have to speak.
Actually, not okay.
I'm not going to be long, but you're asking what the problem is, and what we really need is some integrity. We need people to stand up and say, no, this is not right. You shouldn't eat this. We rely on our system to have a company that is making money off of making people happy, and people want to be happy. And there's nobody in the middle that's saying, I'm sorry, you can't have your tater tots. It's not healthy. This happens in our hospital. People revolt when we take away the tater tots. And so we really need that sense of integrity. We need it from our media. We need it from Dr. Weil and all the physicians. We live in a world where bariatric surgery is acceptable. We're changing our inside to protect us from our outside. And we need our doctors to kind of stand up and say, it's just not right.
Do you have a question?
I would like to know how, we can do that, and I think we should be able to say to our government, I expect you to protect me, and I want you to stand up with integrity and stand up against some of these food companies, and I'd like to know how we do that.
Well, I think by doing just what you're doing, and this is what I said earlier, I don't think we can expect change to come from our politicians or from our bureaucrats. I think it is up to you and people like you to get enough people aroused about these issues that we can start a movement in which the politicians are forced to listen to this.
I think that's exactly right.
They agree. Over to this side.
I'm Denise Milstein. I'm an internist from Phoenix and a fellow with the center. This all kind of smells like nutritionism to me, the focus on fat, sugar, salt. And I wonder if you could comment on how difficult it is to prove scientifically how whole diets, whole healthy diets are healthy for people, and what we can do as medical providers to help to push those forward as opposed to touting one factor and demonizing another.
I think that's yours, David.
I think we have to change how we look at food. I have no problems looking at real food, whole food, and saying that's food. I do think, and I think it goes back to the earlier question, I think much of what we're eating is really not food. I mean, FDA used to have, back in the 70s, a prohibition. It had to be labeled imitation food. Right? And we took that away. And I think we've blurred the line. So I'm using fat, sugar, and salt because they are powerful stimuli. I think that, is on one side, of the food supply, and I think there's real food on the other, and I think we have to change. Social norms do affect how we act. Right? Social norms have an enormous influence on my behavior, on how I'm going to view a stimulus. And I think I do think we have to raise up real food and view it with the kind of respect that it really deserves. And I think because the other stuff is pretty powerful, and it certainly has all the advertising budget around it, I think we're going to have to change how people perceive it. And there's a risk that some people may be offended if we demonize that processed food. But I think we're going to, I think that's necessary.
To this side.
Dorothy Dexter, family doctor from Ecuador. And I think it would be interesting to analyze what has caused this increase in overeating beyond stimulus. Could it be that we're looking for the purpose of our life and we don't find it? And so the anxiety this causes us to overeat. I don't know, all of you probably have felt the happiness of a fulfilling day, or great relationships, or altruism, and perhaps in those moments we don't feel the anxiety to eat. So perhaps we could analyze that aspect of what is the purpose of our life and how that can help us solve overeating.
Well, I know some days chocolate pudding is the way to go.
Well, it's pretty deep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think we mindlessly eat. We tend to eat for comfort. Just about every social activity, at least in this country, revolves around food in some way. So it's become the currency by which we measure the success of a particular event. So I think that certainly is happening. And I think as Dr. Kessler was referring to, we compete in terms of how much food we can serve. So calories, the amount becomes more desirable. I still believe, and maybe I'm in the minority here a little bit, that we can, without demonizing some of those foods that are particularly unhealthy, encourage healthier foods overall to start to substitute. I say this in part, again, because I have 3 small kids, and I have been very careful about the types of foods that they eat. And I can tell you that because of the choices that we've made for them, they're young, they're going to start school next year. They're so young, they haven't been really exposed to that yet. And I'm actually worried about it, because for the first time, their food choices and their food options are going to be out of my control. But they don't desire a lot of the foods that are laden with fat and salt and sugar. They just don't want them. They won't seek them out. And if something is given to them, it tastes funny, different to them. So I do believe that we are capable of having healthier food choices, even if some of those principles that you were alluding to still apply. That it is eaten for comfort, it is eaten mindlessly, it is eaten at every social occasion.
I mean, the greatest gift I think you could give somebody, and I don't think we fully understand the science, is, can you expose a child early on to real foods, and will that decrease the desire later on? And I don't think we have that data. But I think, to your question, and I think Andy deserves, for decades of work, what we're dealing with at a certain level, and this is, I do think this is where the fat, sugar, and salt do stimulate. It's a form of, whether you call it pleasure, a hedon, or reward, as the neuroscientists call it. There are other, how do we deal with stress? How do we what are the substitute rewards? And you really look at the benefit of exercise. It's not because of the amount of calories that you burn off, unless you're doing it, a great 2-3 hours a day, but it's another substitute reward. And you're also, when you're exercising, you're not eating, so there's that advantage. But there's the question of what the other ways to deal with stress, how do we learn to cope? And I think that's what, many different modalities, really having it, that's neuroscience. If we can learn how to deal with that, to substitute those.
I don't know, David, you and I have both seen New Yorkers going 20 blocks at full speed eating a hot dog. So exercise and food sometimes go together.
I like what you said. I think that is indeed profound. I think something that confounds this or plays into it is the way in which this imitation food is marketed, because you look at the commercials on television and the message is that this is how you get happy. That you see people having incredible fun.
It's the taglines.
Consuming this. Yeah, it's the taglines. Right.
So, and last year at the forum, we had the chef Rick Bayless with us, and I think he had a really interesting concept. He wanted to celebrate the first day a fruit or a vegetable came into season as a way of retraining us what to celebrate with.
And be happy about.
And be happy about. Right. And it may be something that's worth thinking about again. On this side.
I'm Bruce Sweeney, a nutritionist from Canada. My question is to Dr. Andrew Weil. Recently, we used to recommend this weight loss program that was working fine with a lot of individuals. But we stopped recommending it because the association with McDonald's. The problem is that we have a crop of generations of losing weight, because we know it's all about what goes in and what goes out, on 1,200, 1,400 calories a day. And they have a point system that they can have their McDonald's or junk food. Can you explain the detrimental effect it has on your immune system having a low-calorie diet that's based on junk food as opposed to a nutrient ratio optimal diet?
Well, that's a complicated question, and I don't know that we have all the answers to that. But I think that I think we can say that the imbalances in the American diet as a result of eating food that is depleted in protective elements and high in elements that promote inflammation have long-range detrimental consequences on health and certainly on immune function as part of that. The reason that I recommend an anti-inflammatory diet is to avoid the pro-inflammatory pressures of this standard diet, and that is an imbalance in the immune system. And it's a result of, it results from eating the wrong kinds of fats and eating high glycemic load carbohydrates and not getting enough protective elements from fruits and vegetables. So I think the consequences on immunity are very, very deep.
My name is Earl Cook from Atlanta, an energy kinesiologist. Question is for Dr. Gupta. We see that our news programs are promoted by the pharmaceutical companies and ConAgra, and how, just by the government, we feel, are controlled by larger interests. How can we be sure that the message is getting through our news organizations when they are being supported by these companies?
I think I've had too many rock concerts as a kid. So,
He had asked whether, he said that the news programs have pharmaceutical advertisers, and
Or ConAgra.
Or how can we be assured that the journalism is not affected by the advertisers?
That's a fair question. I mean, I can only answer from my perspective. I mean, I'm a reporter, so we're sitting on the set delivering a news report. When we do that, just to give you a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look, the screens all go blank during commercial breaks. We don't even have commercial, but because it's all a live feed in directly into the studio. So those are all piped out from various places. So what might be a commercial in one city for one thing might be a different commercial in a different city. So we don't see that stuff. I mean, I'm pretty comfortable from my position saying there's a good wall between editorial and sales. That's all I can tell. I don't know what I'm going to be doing reporting on the 10 p.m. show tonight. I have no idea what the advertisers are for that show tonight. So if I tried to pitch a story that somehow was going to malign a particular company that was also an advertiser of a large news network, would I get pushback and be told that I couldn't do that? That's never happened to me.
It's good to know.
Thank you.
Over here.
Yes, Lynn Baldwin from Wisconsin. I'm an integrative medicine and cancer advocacy physician. You had given a lot of back and forth initially in regards to the problems with good food, bad food. Where is the problem? How can we solve it? And one of the things that I think wasn't mentioned, and I have a two-point question with it, is how do you feel about what is happening here in our country with the fractionization of our family life, whether it's single parenting or if it's families with both parents working, going in different directions, the lack of the cohesive family meals together, the passing on of cooking, and what can we do about it?
Well, a major consequence is that no one eats together anymore, and that the statistics on the number of Americans that families that sit down to even one meal together, they're very depressing. And the numbers of people who even cook one meal from scratch, that's very depressing. This is another thing that Rick Bayless said at the last conference, just a piece of practical advice. He recommended that everyone learn to make one simple dish from a few fresh ingredients that tasted great, that their families would like, get it down, and then share that recipe with friends. I mean, that would be a great trend to get going. And that was inexpensive to make as well, whether that was a fresh tomato sauce or something simple.
I mean, it's probably the only way you can control what you eat.
Yeah.
Sanjay, are you starting to teach your kids to participate in the kitchen?
Yeah. It's interesting because some of the joy that you were sort of alluding to that we get out of eating some of those not real foods. Yeah. I'm not sure we're calling them now. We get out of the fact that we actually have a little tiny garden